So Ryan, have you ever read a book called The Service Profit Chain by Earl Sasser?
No. I mean, I'll stop you here to say that most of the books that I've read feature dragons or spaceships prominently in them. So I don't. Is there a dragon in this profit chain?
So your literary experience is limited to Game of Thrones, is it?
I mean, not entirely, but a lot of it, yeah.
No, this is a book that I read a number of years ago. I actually went I went to Harvard for one of their courses about customer service years ago, and one of the books that they talked about was this service profit chain. And the reason I raise this is because for the very first time, and this was literally 25 years ago, they said the first thing that you have to do when creating a great service experience, or service excellence, as I think it was called then, is you have to focus on your employees. And ever since then, I thought, yeah, that's a bloody good point.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
So today we have a pickle.
Good.
And we have a pickle from Praveen Kumar. So thank you, Pickle. No, thank you, Pickle. I called him Pickle. Sorry about that, Praveen.
Praveen, that's the highest compliment Colin could pay anyone, and we all aspire to be called Pickle.
Maybe that's his middle name.
Yeah, it should be. Yeah.
Praveen Pickle Kumar. Praveen has written in saying, "Is employee experience a fad? And how do you go about building a great employee experience?"
Mm-hmm.
So maybe I'll pass it over to you whilst I'm contemplating Praveen's middle name.
I assume you're going to start referring to me as Radish.
Yeah, something like that. Some fruit. Yeah, maybe.
So is employee experience a fad? Well, I should start with a huge caveat that I'm a famously bad trend forecaster, fad spotter. I remember being a child and seeing microwaves weren't new, but we didn't have one when I was little, and so kind of seeing microwaves and predicting that those would never take off.
Never take off. No.
I mean, it was very impractical. So
those things called cars, they will never take off. Horses are much better.
Yeah, who are we kidding with that? So I'm bad at this, but let me weigh in anyway because I've got opinions.
Please do.
I think that there's two approaches we could take to that question. One is the label employee experience a fad? So in other words, is this kind of like we're going to have an employee experience division and we're going to hire employee experience people? Like calling it that, is that a fad? And then the second question underneath it is the underlying kind of principle of the thing a fad? And I have different answers for those two. I think that the label might be a fad. Like it might be that this is just a new thing for a new label for talking about the way some organizations have been doing things for a while. And then eventually we'll stop calling it that and start calling it something else to kind of keep people interested in it. So the label might be a fad, but the idea that, you'll be more successful caring about your employees' experiences, like it seems hard for me to, unless we're on the cusp of the singularity where we're going to lay off all of our employees and replace them with sentient robots. Well, then maybe we don't need to worry about robot experience. Yeah. But as long as we're employing people, will we be better off caring about what their experience is? Like, yeah. I don't see a logical way around that.
Yeah. No, I agree. I mean, ever since I read that book, I thought to myself, it's a bit of a no-brainer. You can't. The way I've always described it is, imagine turning around to someone and saying, "Hey, Ryan, you go and be really nice to that customer, and if you don't be really nice to that customer, there's going to be a real problem. And you get in here at 6 o'clock in the morning. I don't care if you're not employed until 8 o'clock. You're in here, and so is that going to affect how people the loyalty they have to the organization and all the rest of it, then clearly it does. And not only that, I mean, it's just bad leadership and everything else. So I think the key thing for me is that the key word in employee experience, just like in customer experience, is the word experience.
Yeah.
Which basically, for me sums it up. We are experiential animals, and we constantly are having experiences. And all we're doing when we say employee experience, customer experience, you could go on, couldn't you? Vacation experience, family experience, sports team experience. It's the same thing, but because we are experiential animals, it's how do you apply it in that setting, which I think is the key.
Yeah, I'll say, and I think I know you've mentioned this before. When talking about customer experience, you've talked about going into organizations where somebody's decided, well, I guess we need to care about this customer experience thing. So let's hire a person and give them no budget and no authority and kind of let them rant in a corner for a while, and eventually they'll quit, and then we won't have to worry about it, right? And so I worry that if this is a trend, if it is kind of a fad, that you might see a lot of unhealthy organizations like, well, our employees are unhappy and we've got large turnover. Let's hire an employee experience person and put them in a corner and give them zero budget and zero authority and then blame them when things don't improve. I think like customer experience, employee experience, if it's going to work well, has to be diffused throughout the organization. Like it's a management approach. Am I going to treat my employees as people? Am I going to appreciate that they have a set of needs beyond just the salary that I'm paying them? That they have goals, that they have things that they want to work towards, that they have needs outside of their work. And if we start to care a little bit about that, then they'll do their jobs better, all those kinds of things, as opposed to treating them like cogs in a machine where we can use EX to like whack them on the head squeeze a little bit more juice out of them.
Sure.
What's a trick you can show me? Like that makes me nervous. If instead it's a principle that, like CX, where it's like, well, everybody in the organization needs to care about this, then I think it's great. And I think that would do some good.
The interesting thing is as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, is this so to the to the bit about is customer experience a fad? Is this something that is
employee experience?
Yeah.
Right. We can have a separate debate about customer experience being a fad.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah. And that would be another interesting debate, to be honest with you. It may be a fad that's lasted 20 years, but there you go. But the point I was trying to get to was, so you talk about having someone who's in charge of employee experience. The thing I was mulling over was, so isn't that HR's job? Yeah. And then I was thinking, yeah, well, I could say the equivalent is true for customer experience, i.e., isn't that customer service's job? But the answer I would give about customer experience would be no, customer service is part of the employee experience. And I guess, thinking about it now, I'm arguing against myself. The dealing with HR is part of the employee experience. So maybe it should reside there. But I think overall,
can I push back on that?
Yeah, go on.
Like I think HR can play, and my brother works in HR. We've had those discussions about this. I think HR plays a critical role. But if I'm an employee in an organization, my experience is overwhelmingly going to be driven by interactions with my manager. That's my experience.
I was trying to draw. So I agree with that.
Okay,
I was trying to draw
Go ahead.
No, so I agree with that. I think I was trying to draw the parallel of, do you need someone who is in charge of leading leading it within an organization. So let's go to customer experience.
Yeah.
Customer experience, the theory goes that you should have somebody at a senior level that's in charge of customer experience, and they pull together all the strings that you need to provide an omni-channel experience. But let's also be very clear, everybody in the organization's responsibility is to provide a great customer experience, and blah, 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 blah. So the same thing applies with employee experience, which is it's everybody's job to do those things. Having said that, do you need someone that is in charge of that? And that's where I was mulling over the human resource thing. But I mean, let's say at the very beginning, or let me say at the very beginning of this discussion, that I think that this is really simple.
Yeah.
I think that you can very simply just turn around and say everything we've talked about on these podcasts, and I've been working on for 20 years in this area to do with customer experience, is exactly the same as employee experience, because guess what? You're talking about a person.
Yeah.
And that's the key. How that manifests itself is the interesting bit. So do you need, I would advocate journey maps. I would advocate thinking about the employee and the different journeys they go on. So the joining, the recruitment experience, the training experience, and I would advocate drawing out a customer journey or employee journey of what they're meant to do. I would advocate that a key question becomes, just like with customer experience, then if you are to, what's the experience that you're trying to deliver? So last week we actually recorded, didn't we, a podcast on the 7 key strategic questions. You could just put those questions really to HR, not HR, to the employee experience as well. So it's the same thing. Yeah.
No, I agree.
So I think the interesting bit, though, becomes how do they apply? So let's turn our attentions to, so if we were to look at some of the big theories like peak end rule, loss aversion, prospect theory, the heuristics, the multitude of heuristics, etc. How do they apply? How would they manifest themselves in an employee experience, and when would you use them? Any thoughts?
I mean, we literally could go through the list. I'll highlight a couple that kind of come to mind. One of the the big insights. If I only have a half an hour to teach people about behavioral science, I start with reference points. I think it's one of the real key insights. If you want to understand people, figure out what is it that they're comparing you to, because that drives a lot of how we evaluate things. You hear a lot of stories about employers not wanting employees to discuss salary, which, depending on where you live, may be an illegal request that management is making. In some places, it's protected by law that you're allowed to talk about that.
Okay.
But you can understand why management doesn't like that, and it comes down to reference points. I may be perfectly happy with my salary. I think that I'm getting paid just fine until I find out that Bob, 2 offices over, is doing the same job I am, but being paid, $20,000 a year more. Then all of a sudden,
that Bob is a bloody idiot, mate.
Well, and he's not even good at his job. I mean, let's be honest. So as soon as that reference point is made available, now all of a sudden I'm very unhappy with my salary, whereas before I was. So if you want to know how and this isn't limited to just salary. If you want to know how your employees are going to evaluate any part of their job, figure out what they're comparing you to. Are they comparing you to other employees in the same industry because enough people have kind of switched jobs? Are they comparing you to what it was like here last year? I think that's part of the problem that a lot of firms are having going back from remote work to in-person work. Is nobody had an expectation of working remote, and then COVID hit, and now everybody was remote. And then now the businesses want to come back, but now the employee's reference point is, my life was pretty great when I could work remote. My life was a lot easier. And so with that reference point, what before was perfectly acceptable, commuting for an hour each way, and then
Yes.
working in a noisy, distracting environment, and not being able to handle small tasks during the day. All those things were perfectly acceptable until I had a different reference point,
Sure.
and now I'm viewing them as losses. Now they're much less. So that would be my first insight: is what are your employees comparing every aspect of their experience to? And if they don't have reference points, can you provide them with reference points, make them realize that, oh no, things are actually pretty good here. You don't realize that compared to what other firms are doing, that we're doing a lot. That can help increase the positive experience that people have.
Yeah, and just building on that, because you said it at the end, a reference point is also an expectation, effectively.
Yes.
Yeah. And if I'm hearing that one of our competitors, everybody's working at home or whatever it may be, or that they've doubled their salaries or whatever else it may be, then suddenly that's going to suddenly start upsetting me, isn't it? And I think that just turning around and talking about an industry and saying what's it like to do it working in there will also be another reference point. I think the other part then about it is then it goes back into the framing bit, doesn't it? Which is how you framing what you're doing. And the interesting bit, I guess, is, and again, it applies with customers, is does it seem fair? And I guess when you think about it, potentially employees have got more of a voice than customers. I don't know. Maybe that's again company specific. So what I'm thinking about is, does it seem fair that this is what they're doing? Mind you, it's still a customer complaint, isn't it? So it's probably still the same type of thing.
I mean, some of it will come down to some of the same factors for when customer complaints matter. So if, we talk a lot about cable companies, but in a lot of places, especially in the US, cable companies operate in a monopoly or a duopoly where you don't have a lot of options. And so it kind of doesn't matter if customers complain. If your employees don't have a lot of outside options, then a lot of times it doesn't matter how unhappy they are, like they got nowhere else to go. If, however, you are operating in a highly competitive labor market, as a lot of firms are now, then you really need to care, because your employees have options and they can leave you just like your customers could if you're competing in a competitive marketplace.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and that becomes the key issue, doesn't it? The interesting bit is it makes you again wonder whether, and to the point of the question, if we are entering into a market where there's going to be layoffs and now there's going to be jobs available and everything else, as we've been talking about with customer experience, i.e., it was interesting the other day, I read that Forrester believe that 1 in 5 customer experience jobs is going to go because they're starting to lay people off. And who do you lay off? Where you lay people off where it's sort of you're getting the least productivity out of it, so it's driving value. I guess my point is, does employee experience go down the same route? So in other words, does things start to defocus on employee experience because actually we're laying people off, and we're going to get to an equilibrium. So at the moment, there's high demand for people. There's not enough people. Blah 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 blah. Yeah, that clearly and you and I did the upside of a recession, didn't I? With people being laid off, that's going to get to a more level point at some point. So during that period of time, are people going to defocus on the employee experience as well? And I would imagine the reality is they probably would, particularly for the jobs that are vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that labor's a marketplace too, and
Yeah.
so we'll respond to some of the same forces.
So let's go back to the second part of Praveen's question, which is, so how do you go about building a great employee experience? Any thoughts?
Yeah. So, reference points is one. Like, can you figure out what
Yep.
people are comparing the aspects of the reference to? Another couple of chestnuts that you and I love to return to that I think also apply. I would look at segmentation. So
Yep.
employees are not all the same, and they want different things. I'm thinking about what's been going on over the last month or two at Twitter,
Yep.
where lots of people were laid off, and then they were kind of given this threatening email saying if you're not willing to be hardcore, then you should show yourself out. What's been surprising to me is not that Twitter shed 50 to 80% of its employees, but instead that there are still some people who are there. like
Sure.
I assume that these people have options working in Silicon Valley, but there's some people who are still there. And it speaks to the fact that people have different goals and different things that they want. And,
Yeah.
I worked at a startup briefly years and years ago, fresh out of college, and it's very exciting. Like putting in those long hours and really feeling like you're making a difference and moving things forward. And but that, like, the thought of working that kind of job now, when I have kids and I have other things that I want
Sure.
to get done, is not remotely appealing to me. And so
Sure.
the idea that you would have different groups of people who want different things and you could accommodate to them and you could recruit accordingly. Working in an MBA school, we send out a fair number of our graduates to work in these management consulting firms, Bain and McKinsey and Accenture and that kind of thing. And those are famously difficult jobs from a time perspective. You're traveling all the time.
Sure.
But there's also the customer journey, the employee journey. A lot of times people stay in those jobs for 2 or 3 years, make a
Sure.
bunch of connections, get a bunch of experience, and then move out and do something else.
Sure.
And that's built into the business model. They realize that there's a small group of people who are willing to do this. There's an even smaller group of people who are willing to do it long term. And
Sure.
those people move up in those organizations. But there's kind of like a friendly understanding that you're going to do this for a while, and then you're going to move on to something else, and we'll part ways friends.
Sure.
And I think it's a really smart appreciation of the fact that people are different and have different goals, and you want to serve those people who are most aligned with what it is that you want to do, and
Yeah.
provide accommodations for everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree. I think, and let me try and build on some of that. So, Praveen, to answer your question, for me, it goes back to those same things. What's the employee experience that you're trying to deliver? Which emotions are you trying to evoke in your employees? How are you going to go and evoke those emotions? How do you design that customer journey? And how do you design that journey given the segmentation that Ryan's just talking about? But I think you touch on a few really interesting areas there, Ryan. And again, this is for me about building a great employee experience. So when you mentioned Twitter, it just made me think that just the clash of cultures.
Yeah.
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 And how important the culture of the organization is. So understanding the culture of an organization, one of the things I advise to people before they join us or whatever is to come and spend a day with us.
Yeah.
Just, come in and spend some time in the office, because I don't want them to make a mistake. Okay. So, because it costs me more money if I employ somebody and they leave after 6 months.
Yeah.
So, I don't want them to make a mistake either. But come and see what the culture is like, and we can also then see what they're like. So, is there a culture fit? And obviously, the dynamics between people in Twitter, etc., and the culture there. It also made me think about, as you were talking about segmentation. So it made me think, I lay your money there are people at Twitter that are staying just because they've got bloody stock options.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And they're being forced to stay, well, not forced to stay, but
Golden handcuffs.
Yeah, that then goes back to me, which is again the question that I've said many times before for customer experience. What are the things that drive value? So if value in an employee experience is productivity, you want your employees to be the most productive. If another driver of value is tenure, so you want someone to, you know, stay with you a long time. If you want someone to be, productive and perform well, etc., then what things do you need? Which buttons do you need to press to ensure that that happens? You
That's
know.
great.
It's the same thing as customer experience, and again, it just made me think about leadership is so important. And we did last week, and we'll put a link in the show notes to the 5 rules for I can't remember what we called it, but 5 rules for essential guaranteed to effective leadership. Anyway, 5 rules about leadership. And it just made me think back to that. Everything just comes from that leadership, doesn't it? So if you're building an effective employee experience, it's got to be, for me, it's got to be where we're trying to head, what we're trying to do, what emotions we're trying to employ in our employees. But moreover, then, how do we get the right bloody leaders in place? There's a couple of great quotes as I was looking into this before we started. Richard Branson, a couple of great quotes that he said. One is, look after your staff and they'll look after your customers. It's that simple. And again, that goes back to the Earl Sasser thing in the service profit chain, which is, it's not just about, you don't actually start with the customer and improving the customer experience. You start with the employee. The other thing is, which I thought was a great quote from Branson, which is train people well enough so they can leave, then treat them well enough so they don't want to.
Yeah, that is great.
Yeah. And I thought, yeah, that's right. I always remember I had this guy that was in one of my teams called Dave. And the first day he joined the team, I sat down with him and I said, and this ties into your bit about McKinsey actually, or the sending them people out to consultancies. And I said to him, I said, so this was his first day. I said, do you know where you're going to move next? Do you know what your next job is?
Yeah.
And he said, no. And he looked at me a bit surprised. And I said, well, to me, you've got to have that view.
He thought you were firing him, Colin.
He did, yeah. He's only been there an hour.
Yeah.
But for me, you've got to have that view of where you are on your plan and what you want to do in 10 years' time. And therefore, for me, it was, well, what could you get? And this goes back to the Branson quote. What could you learn during your time with us? Because I clearly know you're not going to be with us for 40 years. Yeah. What are the things that I could help you with learning, and then maybe even move you to another part of the organization where you can add value or whatever.
I think that's fantastic. So, yeah. I think not enough organizations take that seriously and recognize employees care about their own progression. And so if you're not providing a career path for someone within your organization, then they're going to leave. And maybe it's like those consultancies where that's your plan and that's great. But a lot of employers seem to just get angry that employees don't want to stay in the same position forever, which is silly.
Yeah, it's naive.
I've got one more last one. If I can
go on.
Throw it in. One thing that you and I have talked about on a couple of podcasts is the importance of easy.
Yep.
And I think that there's a real opportunity for improving employee experience by focusing on the small annoyances that trip up your employees. I have former students who work at Coca-Cola, and I was surprised to learn that in addition to the in-house daycare, which they have, they also within the building have a dry cleaner and a pharmacy that employees can use. And it's such a relief to these employees to be able to not have to leave the building or leave early or to not have to arrange their schedule or go in on weekends.
Sure.
And, these are just the kind of the minor annoyances of everyday life. And if you can, facilitate making those things just a little bit easier on your employees, it really improves their experience. Also allows them to, not be distracted and to work harder and to focus. So, look for those things outside, beyond just the job. Look to their lives and see, are there ways that we can make their lives easier? And I think that can provide real boosts in employee experience.
Yeah, no, I agree. My last piece of advice would be just go back over the 5 years we've been doing this podcast, listen to all of them, and substitute the word customer for employee, because it's all the same stuff, because you're talking about a human being. And you won't go far wrong if you do that. And the danger is that employee experience is, the title is a passing title, but the importance of it will never pass, because it's absolutely vital. So, okay, so we hope that's been of use to you today. And please make sure that you subscribe to the podcast. Just hit the button and then the podcast will be downloaded to your device, no matter where you are. Okay, thanks very much, everybody, and talk to you all next week. Cheers. Thanks so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this video, please make sure you subscribe so you don't miss an episode.